Tragedy is an incredibly common narrative device in anime. It's to the point where I think you could argue we, as fans of the medium, are almost desensitized to it, given how we can shrug off things like kids' entire families getting murdered as, generic anime backstory. But I'd argue this reaction is more a testament to what it takes to make a tragic event in a story actually effective. Whether it be an isolated tragic incident, a whole story arc, or even a full story in its entirety, making an audience care about a tragedy is about more than just making that tragic event happen. A good tragedy needs to both fit the overall thematic direction of a story, and give the audience reason to care about what's being lost, to actually feel sad about it. A good tragedy can't just happen, it needs to be crafted. And that I've seen, no series does a better job crafting one than Madoka Magica. My first time watching Madoka remains the most a story has ever impacted me emotionally, at least in terms of making me feel sad. And in that regard, I don't think I'm the only one. Madoka has gained a reputation for being a depressing series to watch. Today, I want to dig into what makes Madoka's tragedy work, both in terms of being narratively cohesive and delivering a strong emotional gut punch to the viewer. But 3 things to get out of the way first. 1. Spoilers for the entire series. 2. I'm not gonna talk about Rebellion in this video. Not because I dislike it, I love it, but I just found that it wasn't really relevant to the points I'm making here. 3. If you enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate you leaving a like or a comment with your thoughts. Heck, if you enjoy it enough, I'd really appreciate you subscribing to see what I come out with in the future. I know you hear this from every YouTuber under the sun, but it really does more than you know, both for my motivation to keep making these videos, and for more people to be able to see them. But with that preamble out of the way, we can get to the analysis proper. Most classical tragedies, whether Greek or Shakespearean, will follow a general rule when it comes to writing their protagonists. The protagonist will be a generally likable, upstanding person, but with a significant flaw that drives their decision-making process. This leads to them making mistakes over the course of the story, and ultimately those mistakes result in the tragedy that befalls them. Additionally, this flaw doesn't always have to, but can be an extremely accentuated version of a normally positive trait. Examples of this include Oedipus, whose unyielding quest for truth in hopes of helping his people ultimately led him to blinding himself after learning the messed up truth of his entire life. Or more famously, Romeo and Juliet, who are just so gosh darn in love with each other that they make a series of terrible decisions leading to both their deaths. Of course, like any literary motif, this character trajectory is never going to be followed one-to-one, but I do think it's fair to say that all 5 of Madoka's main characters go through an arc that can be compared to this template. Though, why would you write a protagonist like this in the first place? I think there's 2 main reasons. The first is sympathy. Generally, if you want an audience to care about what's happening to the characters, they first need to care about the characters. A villain's defeat is only as satisfying as the villain is hateable, a hero's triumph only as satisfying as your desire to see them succeed, and a tragedy is only as painful as your desire for that character to be happy. And while there's no catch-all to make every character appealing to everyone, I do think this style of protagonist writing does help in allowing the audience to sympathize with the character's pain. And I think the best way to demonstrate how is by using an example from the series. Homura. In a lot of ways, Homura's defining trait is her love for Madoka and her desire to save her. That desire, though, is what causes most of Homura's pain throughout the series. Actions she takes to save Madoka only result in her having to watch Madoka die over and over again. Now, saving a loved one is a pretty easy motivation to get behind, and saving Madoka specifically should be an even easier one since she's a character we have prior investment in. Because of this, the audience is on Homura's side when she takes actions in pursuit of that goal. So when the results of those actions only put Homura through more pain, that pain feels undeserved. And if the audience views something as being unfair, that can drive a much stronger emotional reaction than just being sad. It creates a distinct desire in the audience to see that character rise above their hardship and be happy. It's that feeling of unfairness that makes it easy to sympathize with a character when their most appealing trait and the source of their pain are linked. And the same goes for the rest of the quintet. A big part of what makes Madoka so likable and easy to root for is her kind and demure nature, but her meekness means she often lacks confidence and initiative, leaving her, for most of the series, watching from the sidelines as all these horrific things go down around her. Mami seems like the ideal mentor, supportive, cool, and capable, but as we learn, those traits are a result of the loneliness she's had to endure being a magical girl. Her supportiveness is really a desperate plea for friends, shown when she tells Madoka she can just wish for a cake from Kyubey, prioritizing Madoka becoming a magical girl over any genuine wish she may have. She just wants companions who can understand her situation. But not long after her facade starts to break and she lets herself be a bit more vulnerable, she dies. Kyoko is interesting in that her arc is actually one of positive change, so her ending is a bit more bittersweet than tragic. But regardless, her altruism leads to the immense pain she feels in her backstory after her father kills himself. And as we see her dynamic with Sayaka cause her to slowly open up again, she's only forced to watch as Sayaka falls into her own despair. Though, this time, Kyoko doesn't entirely lose hope, and willingly makes one last sacrifice. Lastly, Sayaka's defined by her view of magical girls as beings of justice, and tries her best to uphold that archetype. But as her idealized view of what magical girls are and what they do is shattered, she finds that she doesn't want to fight what she sees as a pointless, thankless battle. And after all is said and done, realizing she never could have lived up to her ideal is what ultimately breaks her. The other reason I think writing tragic protagonists in this way is effective is thematic cohesion. Tragedies, like all stories, have a theme they want to convey, and by having the pain the characters feel or the tragedies they experience be linked to or results of the character's own mental states and actions, the story is given a more clear-cut path to delve into whatever theme it wants to. It's given the chance to use its characters to unpack why we're driven to do certain things and why those actions can be destructive. Madoka specifically is a story about hope, and so the struggles each main character goes through are in some way tied to the hopes they hold, and their failures are often a result of that hope being lost. Madoka herself is the unwavering beacon who never gives in to despair, despite all the pain she's faced with over the course of the series. All of Homura's struggles are, of course, a result of her hope that she can one day succeed in saving Madoka, though consequently, Madoka becomes her only source of hope, as she ends up progressively more apathetic towards everything else. Mami isn't devoid of hope, but she's resigned herself to the lonely life she's chosen. That is, until she meets Sayaka and Madoka and sees some hope for companionship. But again, this causes her to let her guard down, and when she dies, it shows us that in the world of magical girls, hope is fragile. And for Kyoko and Sayaka, their sense of hope tracks with their previously mentioned altruism and idealism. Kyoko is initially full of hope in her backstory, before having it all shattered and building it back up over the course of the series, while Sayaka starts out with a hopefulness that degrades over the course of her arc. And I think those two factors combined are essentially the core tenets that make the quintet effective tragic protagonists. They're flawed but incredibly sympathetic individuals, whose flaws, sympathetic qualities, and pain are all tied together by the core themes of the series. And with all that, Madoka has a really effective groundwork as a tragedy. But what I think really elevates Madoka to the amount of emotional impact it's infamous for having is how these character arcs are conveyed, specifically how it leverages tension. To once again reference classical tragedies, a large part of the tension in those came from the fact that going into it, the audience already knew the story was a tragedy. And while on surface level, it may seem that knowing the outcome would remove the tension, in practice, the reverse is true. It amplifies it. You know that something will go wrong, but you don't know how, you don't know what. You're constantly anticipating that moment of critical failure, and that creates that edge-of-your-seat feeling that comes from good tension. Madoka gains this same quality following Mami's death, but arguably to an even greater extent, since unlike most classical tragedies, it doesn't center around just one character. It has four who all get an equal amount of shine, and as such are all equally susceptible to having something terrible happen to them. So starting at episode 4, you're constantly on the lookout for what the next tragic event will be, who it'll happen to, what will cause it. And it's all the more effective because of everything I mentioned in the first part of this video, because you don't want bad things to happen to these characters. Even that early on, Sayaka and Madoka are really likable and easy to root for, and while Homura and Kyoko don't have the most sympathetic introductions, they quickly endear themselves to the audience. So you're on the edge of your seat not just with anticipation, but with worry. And it's that emotional investment that lets the series do what it does with Sayaka. What makes Sayaka's arc so effective is how it transitions from being outright tense to creating this feeling of lingering misery. It starts with her fight with Kyoko, a wall which she definitively cannot overcome at that point. Then she gets her soul gem thrown away. Then Kyubei demonstrates pain to her. All of these moments leverage the fact that you're still on edge after what happened to Mami, but now things are happening much more consistently. The danger is far more present. And as this continues, things go from a feeling of tension where you're anticipating that bad things could happen, to a feeling of dread where you expect bad things to happen. And they do. In fact, they only become more severe, as threats to Sayaka stop just being physical dangers and begin to include personal barriers that start breaking down her psyche. She starts this downward spiral that eventually also drags everyone around her down to their lowest point. Madoka becomes confused, seeing her best friend losing herself entirely and being completely unsure of how to help. Homura loses all her previously established composure as she desperately tries to keep Madoka out of the situation, and Kyoko just tries her best to find some way to get through to Sayaka and save her. It all feels unfair, but more than that, it feels painfully inescapable. And that's because the series paces this escalation of tension so well. It never plays its hand too early. It gradually eases the characters into worse and worse situations, so that by the time they're all seemingly at their lowest point, it feels like there's no way out. Because at no point before this did you see a light at the end of the tunnel. Only a plummet further into its depths. And that goes double for the character's own mental states. With Sayaka especially, you don't just watch her break, you watch her crumble, slowly losing all the optimism and confidence she had at the beginning of the series. But it happens so gradually that not only does it hurt to see her break down, it hurts more that even by the time you can probably predict that her fate is sealed, you still have to watch her and the others struggle through it all. If you connect with its characters, Madoka will break you, because it will make you feel demoralized, it will make you feel trapped, it will make you feel hopeless. That would probably be enough. Madoka gives you a likable, easy-to-sympathize with cast, and over the course of its story, it doesn't just drag them all down to their lowest point, but it does so in a way that feels especially painful to watch due to how inescapable that misery feels. Tie it all together with that aforementioned thematic cohesion, and I think that would have been enough to earn Madoka its reputation both as a well-done and especially depressing anime. But there's one more factor that completes Madoka's emotional impact. Homura's backstory. I think the reason Homura's backstory hits so hard goes back to what I said earlier in the video, the way the series instills in you the desire to see these characters happy. Episode 10 takes that desire and crushes it in front of your eyes. It reframes the whole series as a foregone conclusion. There is no happy ending for these characters, there never could have been. No matter how many times Homura tries, even just saving Madoka is an impossibility. And it's the knowledge that everything these characters went through was inevitable, that all that struggle was futile, which seals the feeling of hopelessness that this series has been building up. And I think it's in episode 10 that Madoka's reputation is fully earned. But then, why watch a series like this? Now, I don't really like getting up on a soapbox about storytelling's deeper merit or anything, but considering I've spent a whole video up until this point explaining why a series is so good at making its audience feel depressed, I think some explanation on why that's important is probably in order. I would say tragedies are the most introspective form of storytelling. There are absolutely times when what you need is an uplifting story that inspires you through invigoration. But what I think can make tragedies at their best even more inspiring is how they force us to confront the hardships of life, the struggles people go through, the mistakes we make, and then remind us that pushing through all of that is what makes life worth living. That's why I love stories like FMA, Fate Zero and Heaven's Feel, Halo Reach, Monster, and Madoka Magica. As it's only after experiencing that hopelessness, only after you think you're at the cavern's deepest depths, that the light at its end shines all the brighter. It's only because the series has gotten you to empathize with the characters' struggles and despair that you're able to feel the full extent of the hope that Madoka embodies and provides. It's through making you feel hopeless that Madoka Magica shows you the importance of hope, because the hope of just one girl can outshine and ease the pain of thousands of others.